Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavors of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction tech or weekly global Passive House showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast, and it's great to be back with Ilka and Mary. How are you both?
Great. Yeah, well.
And g'day to you, Zach.
Thank you. You too, Matthew. How are you?
I'm well. I have two people in my house who have tested positive with COVID, so I'm going to be sticking around at home for the next 6 days now. I think we're done a grocery order, so because we have to isolate altogether. So yeah, this is us for the next week. But it's at the tail end, and life could be much worse. So let's put it that way.
Yeah, no kidding.
All right, well let's get into this week's interview or this week's episode. I really enjoyed listening to your interview with Christina, Mary, and Ilka. So we'll chat about that soon. But before we do, let's thank our sponsors.
Let's do. So thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks also to our champion sponsors, Icon Windows and Doors, Proseco, and SIGA. And thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. And NYSERDA get a bit of a mention in this episode, which we can chat about. Ilka, do you want to tell us how you met Christina, or some of the history that you've got?
Yeah, I actually met Christina in 2019 at one of the conferences, the FIES conference, actually, I think it was in DC back then. And we happened to be presenting the same session, and we connected basically over embodied carbon. And I guess also over being German, and we and we kept in contact ever since. And we actually got a group of women together last year and presented together in a bunch, I think 3 or 4 or 5 sessions or conferences over the last year, and it was pretty exciting, and we've become pretty good friends.
Awesome. That seems like a very fitting thing to bond over embodied carbon. All right, well, hey, let's get into it. This is your chat with Christina Aßmann.
We are happy today to be speaking with Christina Aßmann, who's a consultant working primarily with Passive to Positive, and also has an academic role teaching various courses, which she'll talk about later.
Welcome, Christina.
Thanks so much for having me.
My first question would be, how did you get interested in architecture, and where did you get your education?
So as you can tell, I'm from Germany. I just have to open my mouth once and you will know I'm German. I can't hide that. And I've been in the States for over 20 years now. So it's been a long time and I still have my accent. But I grew up in Germany, and that's where I also got my architectural education. I went to the University of Stuttgart in southern Germany. And as part of an exchange program, I was sent to the United States. And I was actually sent to Lawrence, Kansas, so in the middle of the country. And when I found out I was going there, I called my dad. That was before the internet, really. And so he pulled up the atlas to know what that was. And I found out it was in the middle of the States, exactly in the middle, pretty much. And so that's where I went to study abroad. And I finished my degree in Germany afterwards, but then I returned to the United States for my master's because I was really interested in the Studio 804 program that the University of Kansas offers. It's a design build program where students design and build a project. And I wanted to mention, because this is probably interesting to the Passive House audience, they've done some Passive Houses. They've done Living Building Challenge, LEED Platinum. When I participated in that program, it was in the early days. So our project, it was for low-income family, and it's just really exciting to see their progress as the years have gone on. Dan Rockhill still leads the studio, so it's amazing that he's still there.
I wanted to hear a little more about the design build process and why you were attracted to that and what you did in the program.
So my dad always built things in our house, but I never really participated, right? So, I had seen him done it. And when I was little, even, he would come down, after like a hard days of work upstairs. And then, my mom would put down like a little towel. So he would make like the seating area dirty and stuff like that. So anyways, I didn't have the practical experience myself. And I really wanted to know how to what I'm doing when I become an architect. I wanted to know what I'm talking about. So I wanted to experience firsthand like the construction side of things. And so that's why the design, the studio sounded so enticing to me, because I wanted to build things. And so I became a very expert in putting up drywall for whatever reason. So people always came to me for that. But anyways, we built the whole house in a semester, right? And so that was exciting. But as part of my studies, I didn't have to actually do a construction site training. We just had to prove that we had half a year of internships, but they could be in architecture firms. So I did mainly architecture firm training during my studies in Germany. And then after I finished that degree, I went to University of Kansas for the 804 project.
Yes, some of the schools in Germany, one of them where I went to, in Aachen, they actually require a 3 months internship on the construction site. So I was there every day, pouring concrete, cutting big stones, and I thought that was really, really important as part of your education, really.
So a group of my women friends and we went actually on a construction site on our own. It wasn't required, but we went to the south of France and we helped build a monastery. And so we put up CMU blocks, and you can see, I had so big muscles then. I was strong, and it was a great experience, there. So I agree with you that, being on the construction site, it should be a requirement, and it might be now. I don't know how the program has changed. So I would be curious to see how that's now incorporated.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the biggest lessons learned was also just meeting the people on the construction site, because I feel like as an architect, sometimes you don't really get to know the people very well, and just being in it, sitting in the trailer every morning, warming up with everyone, it was really great.
Yeah, and so as part of my architectural experience, I worked on a lot of construction and administrations, and so I made friends with the contractors. I hope I did anyways. My husband was always joking that they were afraid of me because I was so detail oriented and would point at all the mistakes they had made. But somehow, I think I had some kind of in with them because they always fixed it, and they didn't complain. So I did enjoy that. But yeah, it's definitely important to know, that what you are designing actually will work in the field. So,
which is not always an integral aspect of architecture programs here in the United States.
No, not at all. So, like knowing that, something has to be constructible as well, that's something that some students, like, they don't quite comprehend. I think you have to experience to know, what that means.
So it sounds like you've always been interested in sustainable architecture, right?
Yeah.
How did you develop that interest?
So my upbringing in Germany was really kind of guided by my parents, who are very interested in environmental stewardship. And so just growing up, I kind of had this innate feeling of the need to be good to the planet. I was the kid who had the lunch in a Tupperware instead of a throwaway wrapper. My dad doesn't like to drive a car. He really refuses. He gets angry when you try to force him to go on a little trip in town. So he will bike everywhere. He's now 80 and he still bikes everywhere. He even brings Christmas tree home on a bike, or if a suitcase needs repair that is humongous, he still will strap it somehow onto the bike and bring it to the repair shop. So I think this kind of feeling about sustainability being something that's important was always in me. And so in my architecture career, I was always kind of drawn to that from an early stage, really.
Well, it's great to know, and your parenting pays off.
I know, I'm trying to do the same with my daughter. And it's funny when she says things, like, she really, really mimics what we say. She's like, yeah, this is not good for the planet. Or, she one day said, oh, we need to go pick up trash in town because, it's important to do this. So she has, I think, this kind of same understanding that I hope I convey to her as well.
And so eventually, can you tell us how you got involved with Passive House design?
Yes. So as part of my career, I started out in the Midwest in Kansas City, and then I relocated to the East Coast. And for that job on the East Coast, so in Syracuse, New York, we were awarded a project that is a living building challenge as the main idea. And while I had already worked on Living Building Challenge project on a very minor capacity in Kansas City, this was the first time to really be a project architect, lead designer, to really shape the building, right? And so when we were looking at Living Building Challenge, we really felt like Passive House was a good complement to Living Building Challenge because, in order to achieve the net positive energy requirement for Living Building Challenge, they don't give you an envelope or efficiency requirement. But if you dial in on the envelope, you can really reduce your energy load. So it really made sense to kind of target that as well. So that's when we brought in Passive House, and that's when I became a Passive House consultant.
And so that was when?
2016. We started the project, and I took a test course sponsored by NYSERDA. And then I got certified early 2017. So it's been a few years now. Not as long as Ilka has, I think.
I don't even remember when I got my my certification, but you actually went a little bit further too, right? So you did Passive House, but you also wanted to incorporate some other sustainable certifications in your projects. Right. What other credentials do you have?
So I also recently received the WELL AP certification, the credential. And this is a different building, different standard, really. It's not looking at buildings, but it's looking at the humans in the buildings. So I think that's a really different look at, what needs to be done for a really comfortable environment that really where humans can thrive. So I think that can also be a good complement to other, high performance standards as well. Talking
about human health, how did the pandemic affect your career?
So I think it made a big impact. I feel like always when there's some kind of economic event, my career takes a slight turn, and I did lose my job in 2020. And really what I took it as was an opportunity to reinvent myself, to really look at my career from a really critical standpoint and kind of figure out what I wanted to do next. And my idea was to, try to maybe do something on my own, start a business. And so I took a business class, like a real, I have a business plan worked out. I'm meeting with a business coach on a regular level, weekly. So very kind of different direction from being an employee for so many years. And as I was working on the business plan, I was also, reconnecting with people that I'd met through Passive House conferences. Like I had met Ilka in 2019 at the Passive House conference, and I had also met Michael Hintel from Passive to Positive at that time. I was presenting, and so he came to my presentation. He did present and showed also of his project on a Passive House tour. So we connected there, and then I stayed in touch. And so while I was looking at my next steps, things aligned. And so he brought me on to work with him as a consultant. So kind of interesting how like the COVID kind of shaped, all of this. But I also had the opportunity, you already mentioned that, I'm also a teacher. So that's something that I've always been interested in. My parents were both teachers, and so education has always been an interest of mine. So I was able to also kind of look at that lane and kind of become a teacher again in different capacities. And so really, it's exciting to make a difference in so many different ways.
So what kind of courses are you teaching?
So I am teaching a class right now at a community college. Last year, I taught at Syracuse University, so an architecture class. I'm also teaching an energy code class sponsored by NYSERDA, set up by Urban Green Council in New York City. And I'm also teaching an ARE licensure prep class for Black Spectacles. So it's a workshop for people architects who want to become licensed.
That's quite a variety of courses.
I know. But, I think maybe I have so many interests, and that's why, I'm so excited to be doing everything. So I feel like now maybe I have to pare it down a bit because it's maybe a bit overwhelming.
And your community college course, that's like an introductory architecture course, I assume?
So it's actually their final class. It's only a 2-year program. And so I already have a student who already landed his job that he's going to do at an architecture firm here locally. So it's their final studio where they can do dream big before they actually are thrown into the world of reality. And we are working on a project that's inspired by a local project. So Syracuse was thinking about bringing an aquarium to the Inner Harbor. So that's our idea of, tying back to the history here in Syracuse. And we are just in the programming stages of the design. And then as we move along in the design, we want to bring in some sustainability aspects as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like once you have the opportunity to expose your students just to the idea of passive house or sustainability, they'll never forget about that, right?
Right. Yeah.
No, it's great.
Yeah. Last semester, I brought in Lisa Carrymore, who now works for the Living Future Institute, and she talked about materials. And we really overlay on that aspect because that's really important to me. Embodied carbon, like the toxicity of materials, is a big concern of mine. So, I'm trying to always bring in different aspects that hopefully will stick with the students as they move on into their careers.
Yeah. So I'm curious about your role as the consultant for stakeholder advisory and technical working groups for the New York Stretch Code. So what do you do there?
So as part of my involvement with, being an energy code trainer, I was aware that NYSERDA had put out an RFQL for consultants to be helping with the development of the new stretch code in New York State. And so I submitted a proposal and they wanted me on their team. And I felt very humbled because, tons of heads of big firms are part of this effort. And so me as an independent consultant to be selected, I felt significant. And right now we have working groups where we talk about different topics. I participate more in like the residential side of things. And we just got draft language for the stretch code. And so actually today I just submitted my comments on, like the draft language. So we are really kind of like the things that we are talking about, like are being considered in the stretch code. So it feels great to kind of have a voice in this.
And would the stretch code that you're working on now, what year would that be adopted in?
So the stretch code that we're working on to develop is the 2023 stretch code. Currently adopted is the 2020 stretch code. So it's really on a 3-year cycle.
How close does the 2023 stretch code that you're working on, which obviously is still evolving, how close will it get to Passive House?
So Passive House is one of the pathways to the stretch code. Air tightness, for example, generally as the requirements are not as stringent. So some of the requirements, we're trying to push it as far as we can, but we also want to make sure that there is an interest in municipalities to adopt the stretch code. So we don't want to be too aggressive too fast. So I think that maybe not this cycle, maybe the next cycle, but we're getting there, and they're pushing, New York State is pushing for energy independence by 2015 in terms of economy. So, they are aggressive and ambitious goals, and the stretch code is one way to get there. And to date, I think I have the most current information. 29 municipalities have adopted the stretch code. So that's significant because when I started teaching the energy code classes, only New York City and Beacon, New York had adopted it, along with SVCF. So,
well, that's great. That's inspiring.
Yeah. So by being an independent consultant working with Passive to Positive, you have the opportunity to work on really, really exciting projects as well. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
So I joined Passive to Positive about a year ago now, exactly, I think. And as part of my involvement with Passive to Positive, I jumped on some of the project that had been in development, for a while. And I helped with pre-certification on 2 projects. So the Willow Street project in Boston, and then 11 East Lenox is a CLT multifamily project also in the Boston area. And so those 2, are pre-certified now. Currently working on pre-certification for a row house project with onion flats in Baltimore. And we just started design on a CLT multifamily project in more central Massachusetts. So yeah, very exciting. Lots of different opportunities. And I think, what really was a factor in trying to go in this kind of line of work is that I really wanted to have meaningful work with impact. And I think I'm definitely achieving this. So it's exciting.
Those sound like they're all pretty large projects. I mean,
yes,
for a passive house building, that's pretty exciting to see the expansion of it. Can you tell us a little bit? It's interesting because they're in, not radically different climates, but definitely different climates from Northampton, Massachusetts to Boston down to Baltimore. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and how you have to think about these projects when they're within different climates?
Right. So, for example, New York State has 3 climate zones. And so Massachusetts also has like different climate zones. And then, going down to like the Baltimore, DC area where the mild humid climate is prevalent there. Yes, you have to adjust your design for these kind of climate zones. And that's why we try to make an effort to really look at the climate specific goals here. And that's why we chose FIRS as the certification model for these projects. And, you have to think about, for example, dehumidification is a big consideration in the DC area, because the shoulder months are long and mild, but they're also humid. And, so you have to figure all these things out in a way that, is meaningful and to the project.
So what is different about working on a CLT project compared to, the typical light framed construction?
Mm-hmm. So, to me, of course, because I came from the living building challenge world, it's exciting in terms of embodied carbon, but I think you're asking more about the detail, or other considerations. I think that we have quite a bit of thermal bridges that we have to calculate too, depending where the connections are. But even in a standard building, you will have to have those. You want to take advantage of the specific heat capacity of the product, and so that factors into our calculations probably differently than a standard construction would.
The builder, have they worked with CLT before? Is there a lot of coordination or education that you have to do in order to figure out all these passive house details in a CLT building?
So, for example, at 11 East Lenox, we have Nordic Structures, who is the CLT manufacturer, and they're really good at, providing guidance. The construction team, I think that they really are doing a great job, erecting everything. I was so excited when I saw when they had put up the first platforms and so on. So I didn't have to do as much in terms of helping with that specific detailing. We were more concerned about, specific connections where there might be thermal bridges. But, as there would be on any project, we are very concerned about, issues also with mold risk at certain spaces. So these kind of details.
So I also know that you're very interested in embodied carbon, obviously, but that you have already dove into the carbon counting quite a bit. Have you compared the CLT building with concrete or steel?
So we haven't, I want to do this. So that's on my bucket list of things to do. But we have, not a complete life cycle analysis for the CLT project here at 11 East Lenox. But Nordic provided us a good, summary of the impact, and they basically equated to that, for example, 247 cars would be taken off the road per year. So that's significant, especially when you think about my dad biking everywhere, 247 people like my dad biking instead of cars, they can't really imagine that in the States. And then also, for example, it's equivalent to the energy to operate 124 homes a year. So I think a significant impact, but we want to do more in-depth carbon calculation on this. That's on our list of things to do for sure.
Do you have a software program that you have tried out for embodied carbon calculations?
So we used Athena for some of our calculation recently, and then previously I'd used Tally, but that ties in with Revit. And because now I'm an independent consultant and I'm trying to be lean, I have Revit for my teaching, but not on a commercial basis. We are trying to find cost-effective ways to do this. And I think there's a few coming out right now that, will do this. So be excited about all the emerging tools that are coming out right now.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, and you're also in the thick of energy modeling. It sounds like the row house project that you're talking about, or that you mentioned, there's quite a bit of energy modeling involved there in all different levels.
Right. So it's an interesting project that I think we didn't know that we would do that many different woofy models when we started out. But because it's a row house, row, and not all buildings were purchased by the developer. There's actually one row house in the middle that is not going to be passive house, like the owner didn't sell. So we have three row houses grouped together as one, considered one building, in the passive house world. And then we have next to that the one that wasn't bought, and then 4 more on the other end, but they are subdivided into 2 buildings too. So that means like we have 3 residential models, but then we have to model also 4 commercial models for the spaces that are on the storefront level. So quite a bit to coordinate for sure.
Yeah.
And so some of these row houses, or some of the work being done at this project, it's retrofitting.
Yeah, so it is a retrofit project, but, for example, we are keeping the front facade intact, but then in the back, we are trying to, infilling also with new construction as well. So it's a hybrid, I would say, technically, yeah.
And how is that for modeling in Woofy? Does that complicate the modeling process at all?
I mean, you have just more different wall types, right, that you have to account for. So you have to subdivide things and make sure that they all are correct. And then, sometimes you go back and you look at something and that, I think I didn't quite include this. And because now we're already in Woofy and not in SketchUp. So the process is really that you would do a SketchUp model and then you would import it into Woofy. But at one point, it's too late to go back into SketchUp. Because so many values have already applied to the Woofy model. So I did a lot of fixing in Woofy. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I've gotten better at, modifying things. And, you constantly find things you need to fix to be more accurate. Yeah, that happens.
And what would you say is the biggest challenge on that project?
I think right now our challenge is to look at making sure that we have all the window detailing and the thermal bridges associated with that worked out. That's keeping us from submitting for pre-certification here. But I think we're very close because the project has already broken ground. We are now waiting on shop drawings for the windows. And once we receive those, we can work with the architect to nail down the details to make sure that our thermal calculations are correct.
Mm-hmm. And then also, there's just a lot of talk about just climate getting even more humid around here. Is that something that you're up against, challenges of dehumidification? Yeah, so for example, for that project, we have Minotaur ERVs, which do dehumidify inside the unit. So it's a unit that does it's the magic unit that Alex sells. So I think of it that way. Anyways, yeah, so in this case, we have dehumidification built in. But we also are working on another project that I haven't mentioned yet, but we have more challenges with dehumidification because we would like to do dehumidification and summer bypass, but we haven't found an ERV who can do both. And so now we're kind of trying to figure out our options here. So it's always kind of interesting to kind of look at what are the options and how can you achieve it. Mm-hmm. Goes back to my German upbringing. I think I like tinkering with things a little bit. So, and I'm very detail oriented. So, probably that's what I enjoy about, looking at finding solutions for these kinds of problems. Yeah. Can you explain what summer bypass means?
So summer bypass would mean that, you would have favorable conditions where you wouldn't need to have a heat exchange. And so the air that you would bring into the building wouldn't actually be in touch with the air that's being exhausted. So you can just take advantage of, let's say, cool air that you could just bring in directly into the building. So, for humid climates, we are considering enthalpy-controlled bypass. So that means that it's controlled by humidity and not by temperature, to make sure that we're not bringing in humid air.
Mm-hmm.
And the cooler air would naturally be at night, generally speaking.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is controlled by sensors. And yeah, definitely in humid climates, especially when you have long shoulder seasons, that's something that, can have a significant impact. Because then you have like a longer period of time where you can take advantage of like bringing in air directly without having to do the heat exchange.
What kind of units are you looking at that do the enthalpy controlled bypass?
So we're looking at a Renew Air unit, which comes with a bypass economizer damper as a standard feature, and then has enthalpy controls optional. We're also looking at a different manufacturer that hopefully could provide, in addition to their standard dehumidification, the bypass feature, but that's something that we're working on currently. So stay tuned on that one.
Are there a lot of options out there? I feel like I typically don't really hear about.
There's not that. That's I'm sure that's coming, but no, it's not.
Yeah,
that's interesting because it's the market is responding to the increasing passive house buildings being created in more humid parts of the U.S.
And I think that, we as a passive house community have an impact on shaping the market, right? Because we are creating also the demand for these products. So if, there's more interest in that, I think we're spurring also, or we're guiding like what the market will do, I think, in a way.
Yeah, and that kind of goes hand in hand with what Living Building Challenge does too, right? Just asking for ingredients and materials is something that then manufacturers have to respond to eventually, right?
Right. It's a form of advocacy, right? And I think that that's the important thing is that you might think, you don't have that much impact or influence, but if you just even can do one thing, or ask for one thing, and if enough people ask for it, there will be a change. And I think that's how we will get there. That's what I like about the Passive House Accelerator. We are trying to it's a movement, right? And so we are trying to bring on people. And I think it's the same with, pushing for, materials or products that could be available or should be available to us. So, creating that demand.
Like creating the demand for lower embodied carbon products. I mean, definitely
exactly
some shift there.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, you can't quite get them yet, but it's getting closer.
Right. It's my dream that one day you just go to, one of these box stores and you can pick it up all there. And I think that will happen, so the more we ask for it, the sooner it will happen.
So I have a question about being a woman in the community. Does being a consultant or a certified consultant, going through all the schooling and all the certification has helped you?
So I think, if you have credibility in terms of being able to rely on certain certifications or certificates that you have attained, I think that definitely gives you credibility. I think being a woman in still a male-dominated field is always challenging. When I started architecture, that was one of the things I actually talked about when we had to introduce ourselves, like the first day of class. And I said, it's a male-dominated world, but profession, but I'm interested in it. So I'm, taking the risk. And people looked at me kind of strangely. But now I'm thinking back at this, I think that there's some truth to it, that it's still difficult for women to find their path. But I think specifically the Passive House community has been very welcoming. And I think there's lots of opportunities here that I see. So I think that, it's challenging. And I wouldn't say that it's not. But I think there's ways to turn things in a way that are to your advantage for sure. So might be more challenges for women in general, but I think that there's a path to be successful even in a male-dominated field.
And it's great that in your role as a consultant, you get to touch on more projects than as an architect in a given year.
Right. I do miss the design portion because I do enjoy that. But I feel like I have more impact right now and I can do more meaningful work. Before, I had maybe one rockstar project, and then I also did some less glamorous work. And now I feel like I'm just doing like the meaningful things. And so it feels like I have a lot of impact. And that's great. It's just a good feeling to really feel like, you've kind of arrived in what you should be doing.
That's actually a really good note to end this podcast. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, it's really been great. Inspiring work that you're doing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Christina Aßmann there. Thank you very much, Ilka and Mary, for that. Mary, what were some of the highlights for you?
Well, I'm just impressed with how much she's doing and how much she's contributing to moving Passivhaus along. I mean, in addition to all the individual projects, not all of which we got to talk about, the energy code development, that group that she's working in for the New York Stretch energy code, I think it's pretty exciting that she's getting input into that.
Super exciting that it's happening, and also great to have people like Christina involved. As she pointed out, she seems very humble about the fact of being a single person up with some larger entities. But I think it's really valuable to have people with her experience on something like that, and particularly with the Passivhaus input into that. Ilka, what about you?
Well, I like talking about how she basically took a situation of during COVID, losing her architecture job and really turning that into an opportunity for herself to really go for it and do exactly what she's passionate about, and finding work in all these different areas. And I think that shows that, you, first of all, you can turn something around to be something positive, but you can also really just pick something that you're passionate about, besides being an architect, and work in these different scenarios and areas, and really, basically pick and choose, which is great.
We were having that chat just before we were recording about where is Christina from, as in who's her company. And I think this is more and more common, that it's harder to label some people or pigeonhole them into somebody from XY company, because people are doing lots of different things, involved in so many different entities, that it's not necessarily just a person from one company. They're consultants, they're doing work for other people, they've maybe got some of their own thing going on the side, and it's awesome, because that means that they can influence more projects, but also connect with a bunch more people. And I think that's a really good point. We've talked, Zach, in the past about how many companies were born out of 2008 and people becoming redundant and things generally not being a good time, but it being the genesis of some really amazing things. And we're starting to hear that same sort of thing happening with COVID in from 2020.
Indeed. It seems like times like this are a time when people really start to, well, maybe they're kind of forced to by disruption, or they're inspired to because we have these introspective times, maybe, to think about purpose, and I think that's what's really fun about being part of the Passivhaus world, is that we're a community of people who are driven by purpose. So Ilka, just kind of piggybacking on what you were talking about, that was one of the main things that I was struck by with this conversation with Christina, is just how encouraging and inspiring it is to hear people talk about their work when they're clearly like connecting with something that feels like life's work for them. And that was fun to hear. And I also thought that it sounds like her dad's a real character. I'd love to meet him.
Yeah,
riding around on his bike everywhere.
Yeah, with his with his luggage that needs to be repaired, and
Yeah.
it's awesome. I love it.
yeah, it's so typical German too. My dad is almost 80 and he rides around with his bikes too.
Yeah.
My mom too. I mean, it's an electric bike by now, but they're still doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it that's the first thought is riding as opposed to just jumping in your car and driving somewhere. Hey, any of you guys tell us a bit more about the stretch code? I mean, we've talked about BC's step code, and I know that NYSERDA's stretch code has been talked about, but I'd like to kind of just emphasize what's going on there. I don't know who's got the best background in that and what it is and what it aims to do.
Well, with any stretch code, as I understand it, and I'm, don't work in this area myself, but it's a code that a county can adopt for its use. And it's an easier permitting process to get a building that meets the stretch code than if you were just, for instance, like you're trying to use a more efficient, let's just say composting toilets. Well, in some stretch codes, maybe composting toilets are allowed, so it's easier to get a building with a composting toilet approved. Now, I don't think there are any such stretch codes, but that's the idea that leaped to my mind in our water-starved California here.
The thing that stands out to me is that it's a statewide initiative, right? It's not just New York City,
right?
And this is following the Vancouver example, the British Columbia. It just seems like a great way to inspire the industry forward rather than having a big stick, which just kind of tends to keep people at the bare minimum of what they need to do. This is sort of saying, this is where you can take this. And like we see with a lot of these initiatives around the world, Passive House just slots in so nicely to it. So great to have people like Christina involved in that. The other thing that I really like about her experience was the hands-on practical nature of the work that she was involved in early on. And I definitely get the impression she really enjoyed that and enjoyed the physical labor and getting strong on the building site. But I think that's so important as well for an architect to have that, not just the three-dimensional experience of working with a building, but also she mentioned sitting in the trailer at the beginning of the day, warming up with the team, and just that sort of culture of a building site. I think it would be invaluable to an architect who's at the process of designing, but also I would imagine gives an architect a lot of respect on the building site as well, if they kind of know what can empathize with builders. And I would imagine that builders and contractors would pick up on that. So that was pretty cool. Any other thoughts from anyone, from Christina?
Well, I would like to just add a little bit to what you just said, where I feel like, so when I went to school, that was a requirement of my studies, and I feel like everyone could benefit from that. So I feel like every program should have that, because that gives you a reason to do it, and for everyone, a reason for you to be there. So that creates kind of a safe environment for everyone showing up on the job site, which maybe if you just decide to show up somewhere, you might not have that confidence really. So I think it's a great idea to just include that into your program. Yeah.
Especially if you jump from the middle of Stuttgart into literally the middle of Kansas to get some practical experience. I imagine some great training going on there. But she obviously loved to experience in the States and has chosen to stay in America, which is great to get that cultural cross-pollination and exchange of ideas. I think it's really, really valuable. Awesome. All right. Well, Zach, we got some stuff coming up in Passive House World.
We do. Yeah, things are busy. So at the Accelerator this coming week, we have on Tuesday, March 22nd, so Wednesday your time, Matthew, Mary has organized a passive prefab summit. So it's passive prefab from design to delivery. And both Mary and Ilka will be running the show during the summit. We have I think 5 different prefab manufacturers or practitioners who are going to be sharing their insights about prefab from design to delivery, and already a very big group of people signed up. So we'll include a link to register in show notes, but it's going to be a really exciting event and a return to a Passive House Accelerator Summit after quite a while. So I'm really looking forward to that. Then on Wednesday, so Thursday your time, Matthew, we have on Passive House Accelerator Live, we have field adventures with heat pumps and ERVs. So this is a construction tech edition of the show, and it will be featuring 2 experts from Stephen Winter Associates, Carla Butterfield and Scott Pusey. And then on Thursday, we are doing our episode 6 of the Building Performance Interactive, which is our UK and Ireland based show. So that will be happening at 2 p.m. GMT, which translates to 10 a.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. Pacific. So this episode is entitled Achieving Thermal Performance in Modular CLT Developments. So the BPI series has become very popular. It's really fun to hear about what's going on in the UK and Ireland, and think about how that compares and contrasts to what practice is happening in North America and elsewhere. So registration will be in show notes as well. And then we've got a bunch of stuff happening in the community that's produced by other awesome groups like FIAS. So FIAS is doing a webinar with Isaac Elnacave, who is FIA staff, on incentives. So this is going to be diving into policy. The first step in the ladder is the title. And then that's on March 22nd. We also have a Crushing the Code, another policy related event by Urban Green Council. So Crushing the Code and New York State Residential Code. And that's March 23rd. EMU is kicking off some courses. So lots to dive into in terms of Passive House events and trainings this week.
So much going on. All right. And it's great to have those events starting up again and people doing stuff. Commiserations to Australia, Passive House New Zealand was hosting this year, but unfortunately that's had to be cancelled.
So frustrating.
But it's great that these other events can take place, and so much stuff as well to get into on the Accelerator website as well. I think it's good to remind people that they can go and check out some fantastic videos, but also Mary, your magazine, speaking of Passive House and prefab, though that and many other topics covered in previous examples of the Passive House Accelerator magazine, which people can go and check out and download for free. Some great articles there if people haven't checked those out already. All right. Anything else that anyone needs to plug? Anything else going on in the next week?
I think we've touched on it all. There's definitely a lot of activity here.
There is, yeah, and some great resources. Like I said, I've used some of those fantastic resources for various things, and pointed people to the Accelerator website. So definitely explore and send other people there. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Mary and Ilka. Great to have you back with us and bringing us another fantastic guest. So we'll see you back again probably next month. And Zach, we'll talk again next week with another episode of the Passive House podcast.